The prairie wind carried the sound of weeping across the grasslands, though no living soul should have been near. Chief Makawee of the Lakota reined in his horse, his weathered hand raised to signal the hunting party behind him. The warriors fell silent, their eyes scanning the horizon for danger. But Makawee heard something different in that cry, not the call of an animal or the trick of wind through the rocks. It was human suffering, raw and desperate. He dismounted and moved toward the sound, his moccasins silent against the earth. The weeping grew louder, more frantic, punctuated by gasping breaths that spoke of pure terror. Then he saw it, freshly turned soil in a patch of ground near a cluster of cottonwood trees. The earth moved slightly, and a pale hand burst through the surface, fingers clawing at the air. Makawee lunged forward and began tearing at the soil with his bare hands. His warriors joined him immediately, their strong arms making quick work of the shallow grave. Within moments, they uncovered a woman, her face caked with dirt and tear-streaked, her eyes wild with the fear of someone who had stared into the face of death itself. She couldn't have been more than 25 summers old. Her dress, once fine fabric meant for proper society, was torn and filthy. As they pulled her from the ground, she collapsed against Makawee, her body shaking so violently he thought she might shatter. She tried to speak, but only broken sounds emerged from her throat. He wrapped his buffalo robe around her shoulders and lifted her onto his horse. The woman's name was Catherine Brennan, though it would be days before she could speak it aloud. As they rode back to the Lakota camp, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her fingers clutching the chief's robe as if it were the only thing tethering her to life. Makawee felt her trembling against his back, felt each ragged breath she managed to draw. He had seen many terrible things in his 40 winters, but the cruelty required to bury someone alive stirred a deep anger in his chest. When they reached the village, Makawee's sister, Winona, took Catherine into her lodge. The women of the tribe gathered around, their gentle hands washing away the dirt, their soft voices offering comfort in a language Catherine couldn't yet understand. But kindness needs no translation. As warm broth touched her lips and soft furs surrounded her body, Catherine wept again, this time not from terror, but from the overwhelming relief of being saved. Makawee stood outside the lodge that night, watching smoke rise from the fire within. His wife, Iona, had died 2 winters past, taken by the white man's sickness that swept through neighboring tribes. He had buried her on the hill overlooking the valley, and part of his heart had gone into that grave with her. Since then, he had focused only on leading his people, on keeping them safe from the encroaching settlers who pushed ever westward, claiming land that had belonged to the Lakota since time beyond memory. Yet something about the broken woman in his sister's lodge stirred emotions he thought long dead. Perhaps it was the fierce will to survive he had seen in her eyes as she clawed her way out of that grave. Perhaps it was the way she had trusted him completely in her moment of greatest need, though he was a stranger and she should have been taught to fear him. His closest friend, Red Cloud, approached through the darkness and stood beside him. The 2 men had fought many battles together, had shared victories and losses, had watched their world change in ways their grandfathers could never have imagined. Red Cloud said nothing, but his presence was a question. Makawee finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "Someone buried her like an animal," he said. "Left her to suffocate in the darkness, to die in terror and loneliness. What kind of man does this?" Red Cloud was silent for a long moment. Then he replied, "The kind of man who sees people as possessions instead of souls. The kind we have fought against before." Makawee nodded slowly. He didn't yet know Catherine's story, didn't know who had done this terrible thing or why. But he knew with absolute certainty that whoever had buried her would eventually come looking. And when that day arrived, they would find not a helpless victim, but a woman under the protection of the Lakota, and that protection was not given lightly. 3 days passed before Catherine could speak more than a few words. She spent those days in Winona's lodge, surrounded by the constant care of women who asked nothing of her but to heal. They brought her food, changed the soft hide she rested upon, and sang songs that seemed to carry away some of the darkness that clung to her soul. On the 4th morning, she finally sat up without assistance and accepted the bowl of stew Winona offered with steady hands. Makawee entered the lodge that afternoon, moving slowly so as not to startle her. Catherine's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw clarity there instead of the glazed shock of trauma. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if searching for words adequate to express what needed to be said. Finally, she simply whispered 2 words that carried the weight of her entire world. "Thank you." He sat across the fire from her, his weathered face kind but serious. Through a mixture of simple English words and gestures from Winona, he asked Catherine if she was ready to tell her story. She nodded, though her hands began to shake. Winona sat beside her and took those trembling hands in her own strong ones, lending Catherine courage through simple human contact. The story that emerged was one of betrayal and greed, spoken in a voice that grew stronger as the telling continued. Catherine had come west from Boston 6 months earlier as a mail-order bride to a man named Silas Brennan. He had written beautiful letters filled with promises of a prosperous ranch and a good life in Montana Territory. The reality had been horrifyingly different. Silas was not a rancher but a claim jumper and a thief who made his living stealing from legitimate settlers and selling their goods to corrupt traders. His ranch was a decrepit cabin surrounded by land he had no legal right to occupy. But worse than the poverty and the lies was Silas himself, a violent drunk who saw Catherine as property he had purchased through the cost of her passage west. For 5 months, Catherine endured his cruelty, planning her escape but finding no opportunity. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and Silas never let her out of his sight except when he rode out to conduct his criminal business. Then, 2 weeks ago, everything changed. Silas returned from one of his expeditions with a leather satchel filled with gold coins and a wild look in his eyes. Catherine had accidentally seen the contents of that satchel. She recognized the coins immediately. They bore the distinctive mark of the Territorial Bank in Helena, and she knew Silas had neither the means nor the legitimacy to possess such wealth. She said nothing, but Silas had seen the recognition in her face. That night, he had beaten her unconscious. She woke in absolute darkness, unable to move her arms, unable to breathe properly. The weight of earth pressed down on her chest. She was buried alive, left to die in the most horrifying way imaginable. But Silas had been careless in his haste. The grave was shallow, dug quickly in hard ground. Catherine had managed to work one arm free, then the other. She had clawed at the earth above her with bleeding fingers, driven by a primal desire to survive that overrode even her terror. As Catherine finished her story, tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained steady. She looked directly at Makawee and said, "He will come looking for me. Silas needs to know I'm dead. If he discovers I survived, he will come for me. And he won't make the same mistake twice." Makawee's expression darkened. He understood the threat. Men like Silas Brennan were dangerous not because they were strong or clever, but because they operated without conscience. They saw other human beings as obstacles to be removed or tools to be used. The gold Catherine had seen represented someone else's life savings or perhaps even blood money from something worse. A man who would steal such wealth would kill anyone who could connect him to the crime. Red Cloud entered the lodge, and Makawee quickly explained the situation in Lakota. The warrior's face grew grim. He had encountered men like Silas before, white criminals who hid in the territories beyond the reach of proper law, preying on settlers and natives alike. They gave all white men a bad name and made peace between peoples nearly impossible. "We could move the camp," Red Cloud suggested. "Travel north to where our cousins winter. He would never find her there." But Makawee shook his head slowly. "We run from no man," he said. "And if we run now, we run forever. Men like this one do not stop hunting. They cannot afford to leave witnesses alive." He turned to Catherine, speaking carefully so she would understand. "You are safe here. Under my protection. Under the protection of our people. This man will not touch you again." Catherine's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different. They were tears of gratitude mixed with something else, hope, perhaps, or the first stirring of belief that her nightmare might truly be over. She had expected to die in that grave. Every breath since then had been borrowed time. Now this man, this chief of people she had been taught to fear, offered her not just safety but genuine protection. That night, Makawee posted guards around the camp's perimeter. He sent scouts to watch the trails leading from settler territory. If Silas Brennan was coming, they would see him long before he arrived. And Makawee would be ready. The days turned into weeks, and Catherine began to heal in ways that went far deeper than her physical injuries. Winona taught her simple Lakota words, and Catherine found herself learning not just a language but an entirely different way of seeing the world. The Lakota people measured wealth not in gold or possessions but in generosity, in honor, in the strength of community bonds. It was a revelation to someone who had grown up in Boston society, where status and material wealth defined a person's worth. She learned to help with daily tasks, her hands growing stronger as she worked alongside the women tanning hides, gathering roots, and preparing meals. The work was hard, but there was a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose that her privileged upbringing had never provided. More importantly, there was laughter. Despite the hardships these people faced, despite the constant threat from settlers and soldiers pushing into their territory, the Lakota found joy in each day. Makawee watched Catherine's transformation with quiet approval. She was resilient, adapting to circumstances that would have broken someone weaker. He found himself drawn to the lodge where she stayed, often stopping by with fresh meat from the hunt or a warm robe for the cooling autumn nights. Their conversations grew longer, and though they still struggled sometimes to understand each other's words, meaning passed between them with increasing ease. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside Winona's lodge, Catherine asked him about his wife. Makawee was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Then he began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. Iona had been beautiful and strong, a woman whose laughter could chase away the darkest thoughts. They had been married for 15 winters and had one son, now grown and married himself, living with a band to the north. The white man's sickness came like a storm, Makawee said, his English slow but clear. Many died. Our medicine could not fight it. I held her hand as the fever took her, and I promised I would lead our people well, that her death would mean something. He looked at Catherine then, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. I thought my heart was buried with her. But you reminded me that life continues. That there is still purpose in protecting others. Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. This man had saved her life without hesitation, had offered protection without asking for anything in return, and now sat beside her sharing his deepest pain. The contrast between Makawee and Silas was so stark it seemed impossible they were the same species. In my world, she said softly, women are taught that we need men to survive. That we should be grateful for any marriage, any protection, even if it comes with cruelty. I believed those lies until I found myself buried in the ground, put there by the man who promised to cherish me. She paused, gathering courage. You've shown me that protection should come from strength and honor, not from ownership and fear. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. It was too soon for Catherine to name what she felt, too fresh after the horrors she had endured. But she recognized the stirring of emotions she thought Silas had murdered along with everything else he had taken from her. The peaceful moment shattered when a scout came running into camp, his horse lathered with sweat. He spoke rapidly in Lakota to Makawee, his words urgent and clipped. Catherine watched the chief's expression harden, watched his hand move instinctively to the knife at his belt. Red Cloud appeared from his lodge, already armed, and other warriors began to gather. Makawee turned to Catherine, his voice steady but serious. 3 white men camp 5 miles east. One matches the description you gave of your husband. They have been asking travelers about a Lakota camp, about a white woman. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. Do not fear. They will not take you. Catherine's blood ran cold. Silas had come, just as she knew he would. And he had brought others with him, probably men as ruthless as himself. She thought of the gold she had seen, realized that Silas likely had partners in whatever crime had produced such wealth. They could not afford to let her live, could not risk her testimony identifying them. I won't let you fight my battle, Catherine said, standing abruptly. I'll go to the authorities in Helena, tell them what I saw. You and your people shouldn't risk yourselves for me. Makawee rose to face her, his expression gentle but absolutely immovable. You do not understand our ways yet. When we give protection, it is not conditional. It does not end when danger comes. It is especially important then. He gestured to the warriors gathering around them. These men would be insulted if you suggested they should not defend someone under our care. Honor demands it. Red Cloud stepped forward, speaking in heavily accented English. White woman, you are guest. Guest is sacred. We protect sacred things. His scarred face softened slightly. Also, Makawee is chief. We trust his judgment. He says you are worth protecting, so you are worth protecting. Catherine felt tears threatening but forced them back. She had lived her entire life in a world where people acted only from self-interest, where kindness was a transaction and protection came with a price. These people were offering both freely, asking nothing in return, and willing to face danger to honor their commitment. It was humbling and inspiring in equal measure. That night, the camp prepared for conflict. The Lakota warriors moved through the darkness like shadows, their knowledge of the land absolute. Makawee led 12 men, leaving Red Cloud behind to guard the camp and protect Catherine if things went badly. They approached the site where Silas and his companions had made camp, moving silently through tall grass that whispered secrets to the night wind. From a ridge overlooking the camp, Makawee studied the 3 men below. One was clearly Silas Brennan, a thick-shouldered man with a cruel face, currently drinking from a bottle and gesturing angrily as he spoke. The other 2 were harder men, the kind who lived by violence. They wore guns low on their hips and carried themselves with the casual confidence of professional killers. These were not simple claim jumpers. These were men who had chosen evil as a way of life. Markawee listened to their conversation, his English good enough to catch the essential meaning. Silas was arguing that they should raid the Lakota camp immediately, take Catherine, and leave no witnesses. One of the other men, a lean figure with a scarred face, disagreed. He wanted to wait for dawn, approach peacefully, and offer to trade for the woman. If the Indians refused, then they could resort to violence. The third man, youngest of the group, said little. But Markawee noticed how his hand never strayed far from his gun, how his eyes constantly scanned the darkness. This one was dangerous precisely because he was alert and cautious. The scarred man was the leader, calculating and cold. Silas was the weakest link, driven by emotion and whiskey, more liability than asset to his companions. Markawee made his decision quickly. He could attack now, eliminate the threat while the men were relaxed and unsuspecting. But such an action would bring soldiers, would give the white authorities excuse to retaliate against his people. The Lakota had struggled for years to maintain their territory and their way of life against encroaching settlement. One act of violence, no matter how justified, could undo fragile treaties and invite catastrophe. Instead, Markawee chose a different path. He stood up from his concealment and walked directly into the firelight, his hands empty and visible, his warriors remaining hidden in the darkness. The three men scrambled for their weapons, but Markawee spoke quickly in clear English. "I am Markawee, chief of the Lakota band that camps west of here. I know why you have come. I know what you seek." Silas lurched to his feet, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. "You got my wife, Indian. I want her back. She's my property, legally married. You got no right to keep her." The scarred man put a hand on Silas's arm, restraining him. His eyes assessed Markawee carefully, looking for weakness and finding none. "Chief, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. Mr. Brennan here is just worried about his wife. We heard she might have wandered off, gotten lost. If she's with your people, would be grateful to have her return safely." Markawee's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The woman you speak of was found buried alive. Left in a shallow grave to suffocate in darkness. This is not the action of a worried husband. This is murder, only she refused to die." The words landed like stones in still water. The scarred man's eyes flickered to Silas, reassessing. The young gunman's hand moved closer to his weapon. Silas himself went pale, then red, his mouth working soundlessly for a moment before rage found voice. "She's a liar. She ran off, probably fell into some hole. She's always been clumsy, always causing trouble. You can't believe." Silence. Markawee's single word cut through Silas's protests like a blade. "I am not interested in your lies. I came here to offer terms. Leave this territory. Never return. The woman stays under Lakota protection. If you agree, you live. If you refuse, my warriors will ensure you never threaten anyone again." The scarred man studied Markawee's face, then glanced at the darkness surrounding the camp. He was smart enough to realize they were already surrounded, that they had been outmaneuvered before they even knew the game had begun. But Silas was too drunk and too stupid to recognize defeat. "I ain't leaving without what's mine." Silas pulled his gun, pointing it shakily at Markawee. "You bring her here now, or I'll." The arrow took him through the shoulder before he could finish the threat. Silas screamed and dropped the gun, collapsing to his knees. Warriors materialized from the darkness, arrows nocked and ready. The scarred man and the young gunman found themselves surrounded by a dozen Lakota warriors, each one perfectly capable of killing them before they could draw their weapons. Markawee stepped forward, looking down at Silas with contempt. "You are weak. You prey on those you think cannot fight back. But you made a mistake when you buried Catherine Brennan. She survived because she is stronger than you could ever understand. And now you will live with that failure." He nodded to his warriors, who hauled Silas to his feet. The scarred man wisely kept his hands away from his weapons, his face expressionless. The young gunman looked ready to fight, but a slight head shake from his leader kept him still. "Take them to the territorial marshal in Helena," Markawee said. "Tell him about the gold. Tell him about attempted murder. Let white man's law handle white man's crimes." He met the scarred man's eyes. "And know this, if any of you ever come near Lakota territory again, law will not save you." The scarred man nodded slowly, understanding perfectly. They had lost, and they had lost completely. 3 warriors escorted the prisoners toward Helena, while Makawee returned to camp with the rest of his men. Dawn was breaking over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As they rode, Makawee felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The threat had been neutralized without bloodshed, without giving the white authorities excuse for retaliation. His people were safe. Catherine was safe. When they reached camp, Catherine was standing outside Winona's lodge, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. Red Cloud must have told her that Makawee had confronted Silas, because relief flooded her face when she saw the chief riding in unharmed. She ran to meet him as he dismounted, then stopped abruptly, suddenly uncertain about what was appropriate. Makawee closed the distance between them and spoke quietly. "It is finished. Silas and his men are being taken to Helena. They will face justice for their crimes. You are free, Catherine. Truly free." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simple meaning. Catherine was free from Silas, free from fear, free from the death sentence she had escaped. But freedom brought its own questions. What would she do now? Where would she go? Boston held nothing for her anymore. She had no family there, no friends who would understand what she had endured. The civilized world that had raised her now seemed hollow and false compared to the genuine community she had found among the Lakota. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted softly. "I have nowhere to go, no resources. Everything I owned was in Silas's cabin, and I'd rather burn it all than ever set foot there again." Makawee reached out and took her hand, the gesture simple but profound. "You have a place here, if you wish it. My people have accepted you. Winona cares for you as a sister. And I." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I would be honored if you chose to stay. Not as a guest, but as one of us." Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. She understood what he was offering, not just shelter, but belonging. A true home among people who had shown her more kindness in weeks than she had known in her entire life. And more than that, she saw in Makawee's eyes the same emotion that had been growing in her own heart. Something that had seemed impossible just months ago, when she had been buried alive and left to die. "I want to stay," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I want to learn your ways, your language. I want to be part of this community. And I." She met his eyes directly, finding courage in his steady gaze. "I care for you, Makawee. More than I thought I could care for anyone after what Silas did to me." The chief's weathered face softened into a smile, and Catherine saw genuine joy there. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. Around them, the camp began to stir with morning activity. Women emerged from lodges to start fires. Children ran between the teepees, laughing and playing. Horses whinnied in the morning air. Life continued, as it always did, but Catherine felt herself becoming part of that flow instead of merely observing it. The weeks that followed brought profound changes. Catherine learned to speak Lakota with increasing fluency, her quick mind absorbing the language rapidly. She learned to work hides, to identify medicinal plants, to read weather signs in the sky. More importantly, she learned to be part of a community where every person mattered, where individual strength contributed to collective survival. Makawee courted her according to Lakota custom, bringing gifts to Winona's lodge, spending hours in conversation by the fire. He taught Catherine to ride in the Lakota way, to track game, to read stories written in disturbed earth and broken branches. Their love grew slowly but surely, built on genuine respect and shared values rather than desperation or loneliness. Winter came early that year, blanketing the prairie in white. On the winter solstice, when darkness held dominion over the land, Makawee and Catherine were married in a ceremony that blended Lakota tradition with Catherine's own heritage. She wore doeskin decorated with intricate beadwork that the women of the tribe had created for her. Makawee wore his finest ceremonial dress, his bearing proud and dignified. As they stood before the tribe, hands joined, Catherine reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west as a mail-order bride seeking a new life. She had found death instead, buried alive by a man who saw her as disposable property. But from that grave, she had been reborn. Makawee had given her more than rescue. He had given her a second life, one rich with purpose and meaning. The scars remained, both physical and emotional. Sometimes Catherine woke in the night, gasping from dreams of suffocating darkness. But Makawee was always there, his strong arms holding her, his calm voice reminding her that she was safe, that she was loved, that the darkness had no power over her anymore. She learned that healing was not forgetting. It was choosing to build something beautiful from broken pieces. It was finding strength in surviving what should have destroyed you. It was accepting love from unexpected sources and allowing yourself to become someone new without denying who you had been. Years passed, and Catherine became known among neighboring tribes as a bridge between worlds. She could speak with white settlers in their language, helping to negotiate trades and resolve conflicts before they escalated into violence. She taught Lakota women new skills she had learned in Boston, while incorporating their wisdom into everything she did. She and Makawee had 3 children together, each one a living symbol of 2 cultures joining in love rather than conflict. When visitors to the Lakota camp asked how a white woman had come to marry a chief and live among the people, Catherine told her story without shame. She spoke of being buried alive, of clawing her way out of a grave, of being saved by a man who saw her humanity when her own husband had denied it. She spoke of finding home not in the place of her birth, but in the community that had welcomed her when she had nothing. And always, when she finished telling her story, she would look at Makawee with eyes full of gratitude and love. He had given her a second life. And she had made that life into something extraordinary.